Okay, folks, final video for today, and this one's kind of an interesting one. I didn't quite expect this at all. So, Ruptly asks us the question, who are the Extinction Rebellion? The eco-activists grounding planes and shutting down cities? Well, let's meet the folks, shall we? Calling for civil disobedience in the face of climate change, Extinction Rebellion protesters have been remarkably successful in thrusting themselves into the headlines. But what is the movement all about, and who's behind it? Best known for shutting down the streets of London in April, Extinction Rebellion upped its game on Thursday with a protester affiliated with the group grounding an Aer Lingus flight from London City Airport to Dublin. Another protester, Paralympian James Brown, clambered onto the roof of a British Airways plane and refused to budge, prompting police to eventually remove him. The disruptions came as Extinction Rebellion threatened a Hong Kong-style occupation and shutdown of the airport, as similar protests hit more than 60 cities worldwide. Ultimately, it is part of Extinction Rebellion's aim to get people arrested. Read a flyer circulated by activists in Dublin. To the end, the group has been successful. More than 1,000 activists have been arrested in London alone this week, including 50 at London City Airport. You know, you environmental activists need to learn a lesson right now. It's very, very important. Whether you're right or wrong is not the question. But if you keep doing shit like this, you're not helping your cause, you're hurting it. Because people see you do stuff like this, and they're going to think you're fucking crazy. This is not something sane people do. This is pure craziness. You can't just get on top of a frickin' plane where you could easily fall off and die. Hell, what if that thing had taken off with you on top of it? You're not on the outside looking in. You're not seeing how you look to other people. You look like a lunatic. You look like a crazy person. And who's going to listen to a crazy person? I mean, really. Did you think about that? No, of course you didn't. Now, the article proceeds, what do they want? The group's demands are threefold. First, they call on governments to tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, a similar demand to that made by Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg at the UN Climate Action Summit in New York last month, a seemingly benign demand, but one that paints opponents as anti-truth. Secondly, they demand the government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. Finally, the group demands the government partner up with activists and create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. While a citizens' assembly would draw on a cross-section of society, it would be government-created and guided by a collection of NGOs and academics, as was the case in Ireland when the government convened such an assembly to pave the way for a referenda on gay marriage and abortion in recent years. Extinction Rebellion make no mention on whether NGOs with opposing views will be included in the deliberation. So far, if I were to compare this group to a cult, and I'm familiar with the BITE model and the science behind cult analysis, to see how well these people fit to the BITE model. They've already hit one checkbox already, that is separating information into insider-outsider doctrine. In that case, painting their opponents as anti-truth by way of their first demand, which is demanding that they tell the truth by declaring a climate ecological emergency. That's separating it into an insider-outsider doctrine that is anatomical of a cult. Further, if you look below, I'll put a link in the description of this article. A link to this article, you'll see that there's a picture of them dressed in some weird little costume. They look like a Hollywood movie-style cult, for crying out loud. I think they're wearing some weird pale-face makeup. There I go with my fidgeting again. Need to stop fidgeting. They're wearing weird pale-face makeup, and they're wearing these weird red robes. They literally look like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. It's ridiculous. At XR's rallies, protesters have called for any number of ways of meeting these goals and more, including government bans on meat and private cars. Abolishment of airplane boycotts of the fashion industry and disbandment of the military disrupting commerce is fair game for making their points, as is disrupting vital services, as a cancer patient in London was forced to walk to hospital treatment due to XR's roadblocks. Spokesperson Savannah Lovelock told Sky News that while she was really sorry, such action is necessary for the good of the planet. An appeal to authority. Central to all the group's demands is a radical expansion of state power, reducing greenhouse gases to net zero. If a state-led effort would give government the power to restrict or outright deny its citizens freedom to travel, freedom to choose their own diets, and freedom to build their homes however they want, in the U.S. draft text of Green New Deal legislation gives a sneak peek at just how all-encompassing this would be. Working wealth redistribution and reparations for historic oppression into the mix of for good measure. A potent illustration of the group's appeal to authority came last November when XR's co-founder, Gail Bradbrook, marched on Buckingham Palace and read aloud a message to Queen Elizabeth with great humility, calling on the monarch to save the planet by royal decree. It isn't enough to live a life voluntarily simplicity, academic and XR campaigner Rupert Reed wrote at the time. The implied meaning is clear. People have to be coerced into complying. This is my issue with environmentalist and environmentalist legislation. I am all for saving the planet if if it's in very real danger. But these kinds of sweeping reforms and this added legislation is just going to add to state power, making governments around the world even more authoritarian. It's a gateway to oppression. It's a gateway to people being crushed under thumb. That's what I'm worried about. There's got to be a way that we can get people to cooperate with saving the environment if it is indeed in danger without creating unnecessary added legislation that's just going to make governments that much more powerful. That's the last thing we want. Because every great crime in human history, whether it was the Nazi Holocaust or Stalin's Great Purge or whatever it was, authoritarianism was at the heart of all of it. It's always some authoritarian regime behind it. We want to make that kind of thing less likely by any means necessary. We want to eliminate that possibility. So, going forward, who's behind it all? Here's where things get interesting. Exploding onto the scene with a recognizable logo, coherent imagery across multiple continents, a dominant social media presence, and a slick website, the leaders of Extinction Rebellion are no rabble of bong-smoking malcontents. Especially not Dr. Gail Bradbrook. The co-founder of the movement told the BBC that she came up with the idea after praying in a deep way while under the influence of psychedelic medicines on a retreat last year. Yeah, remember how I said this might turn out to be a cult of sorts? I'm starting to think it might be. Because now it's getting into sort of a pseudo-spiritual kind of thing with this Gail Bradbrook person. In truth, Bradbrook has made a career out of activism and has for 2 decades worked as a professional campaigner, speaking at a talk in 2016. She admitted that the role is mostly about securing your own paycheck. As director of Citizens Online, a charity campaigning for digital inclusion, Bradbrook has worked with BT to lobby the British government. Joining Bradshaw, our former organic farmer Roger Halliman, also involves our Occupy London veteran Tasman Osmond, a granddaughter of British nobility, and ex-UN worker Laura Reeves. Behind the movement is a bulwark of elite cash heiress Aline Getty, was kicked in nearly £500,000 of her family's oil wealth to the group via the Climate Emergency Fund, claiming the disruptions necessary to take on climate change. According to its own data, Extinction Rebellion has raised just short of £1 million in large donations since March, from groups like the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, set up by a hedge fund manager and run by a former vice chairman of billionaire financier George Soros, Open Society Institute. There's Soros again. So what has the group achieved exactly? Aside from annoying motorists and boosting superglue sales, Extinction Rebellion has achieved some of its aims. 11 countries and dependencies, beginning with Britain and Ireland, have declared a state of climate emergency. Even if Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar did say afterwards that the declaration was a symbolic gesture. What Extinction Rebellion has also been successful in is pandering to the wishes of global financiers and the new captains of green industry. Excuse me. The group's call for net zero carbon emissions is echoed by the World Bank and a host of investment firms, including HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, and Citi, that see profits to be had in climate-related sectors. None of this is a bad thing on the surface, except that these groups, which have banded together to form the Climate Finance Partnership and Blended Finance Action Task Force, want access to taxpayer money and pension funds to do this. The Western money, according to the groups, will be funneled into projects in Africa, Asia, and South America. Yeah, see, when climate change deniers say that it's really just a part of a financial Ponzi scheme to raise money for the green energy industry, I'm sorry, but they're kind of right. Even if climate change is a very real danger, as many left-wingers claim, the Ponzi scheme, the pyramid scheme of green energy definitely exists. There's big money involved in this. I thought you guys were supposed to be leery of big corporations. Oh, but, except for when they support your agenda, then not so much, right? Go figure. Hypocrite. Rarely do the demands of activists and the will of international finance line up, and not everyone is happy in London. Police Commissioner Nick F. Grave has warned that the current protest will hamper officers' ability to tackle street-based violence and leave the city more vulnerable to terrorism. Street blockages and airport disruptions may put Extinction Rebellion at odds with majority of the population. Majority support is unnecessary. XR co-founder Roger Hallam has repeatedly referenced Gene Sharp as an inspiration, an American political scientist. Sharp's theory of nonviolent action, that only 3.5% of a population need to back a protest movement before it reaches critical mass and triggers change, has been adopted and put into practice by color revolutionaries around the world, from U.S.-sponsored seated protests in Serbia at the turn of the century to Arab Spring revolutionaries more recently. Celebrities have lined up to endorse Extinction Rebellion, from gloom rockers Radiohead chipping in £300,000 to Benedict Cumberbatch joining protesters camped in Trafalgar Square with elite cash and backing, as well as round-the-clock media coverage. Extinction Rebellion is well on its way to Sharp's tipping point, and has well and truly glued itself to the public consciousness already. Yeah, so they've got a lot of financial support. There's definitely a financial Ponzi scheme in environmentalism. Deny it all you want, but it is absolutely there. The evidence exists. There's big money behind it. There's lots and lots of big money. And I guarantee a lot of your climate scientists are paid off. Maybe not all of them, but quite a few, I'm sure. I'm not saying that climate change isn't necessarily happening. I'm just saying that don't trust your climate activists or your favorite scientists or whoever. Don't trust them. Because there's big money involved in this, and I'm suspicious as hell. Okay, folks, real talk time. My cult senses are tingling when it comes to these guys. Extinction Rebellion has the look and feel of a brainwashing cult, and I'm going to have to do some heavy research. But I promise you that I'm going to do a follow-up video on this, where I will cover my opinion on whether or not they fit the profile of a cult. But they definitely got the look and feel of one for sure. Anyway, peace!